Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting. We'll all stand please for the opening prayer. Lord, we ask you that you guide us in our decision making, protect us in the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. They hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. So welcome to tonight's meeting for Monday the 23rd of March 2020. I must inform the meeting that this council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at the council meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. Albury City accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations. I've received one from Councillor King. Pecuniary, significant. Professional association with the tenderers. Albury Council meeting number 13.4, the Lamington Sports Ground car park, Pearsall Street. And the action is to leave the chamber. Mr. Zachnich.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. This advice to the meeting relates to the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979, Section 10.4, requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of the council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Accordingly, the provisions of Section 4.151 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the Council. Planning decisions mean a decision made in the exercise of a function of Council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 9.3 of Part 9 of that Act. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Zachnich. Just before we take the apologies, I'd like to thank the staff for setting out the chamber this evening. This is indicative of the federal and state requirements for social distancing. We also will be considering other options as we move further into this crisis. So thanks to the staff for enabling that. We have apologies. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the Council receive, note and accept the apologies of Councillors Stutchbury and Cameron and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I'm happy to move that. All those in favour? Anyone against the motion is carried. And we have no mayoral minute. Action plans. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor, to move the motion that the following action plans be received and noted. Action complete. For noting only, actions awaiting response from external parties, actions in progress and long-term issues more than 3 months. If I can get a second, I'd like to say something very briefly.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Notwithstanding that some councillors might want to ask some questions about these areas. However, I thought it timely that we acknowledge that in this situation, in these times, some of these actions may take somewhat longer than we had anticipated, and there might be a number of areas where we need to be quite more accepting with regards to progress on a number of the initiatives for not just internal but external reasons as well. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. There being no further questions or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? Motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Confirmation of minutes of previous meeting held on Monday the 9th of March. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the following recommendation that the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, 9th of March at 6:30 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, there being no further question or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have no reports from community forums. Notice of motions or notice of rescission. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would seek your permission to withdraw this motion and instead move an alternative motion.
Yeah, happy you've drafted the motion. Happy to allow it. Thank you, Councillor Con. If you can continue.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council 1 thank staff for the prompt provision of information regarding steps that have been taken to protect staff, including increased options for working from home and ensuring that staff on casual and employment contracts working for council have access to sick leave and/or other paid leave if they cannot attend work because of COVID-19. B, what, if any, rental relief could be provided to council tenants, especially any not-for-profit organisations where COVID-19 has impacted on their ability to pay rent? C, what, if any, financial or other assistance council could give to community organisations undertaking essential outreach, including assisting elderly or frail residents and providing food delivery services during the outbreak? D, what policy settings have been put in place to govern public meetings organised by council or held in council facilities where the number of attendees is less than 500 that best protect public health? And E, how an amendment can be made to clause 5.2 of the Albury City Code of Meeting Practice to allow councillors to participate in a meeting of council by electronic means during the outbreak where public health considerations make this appropriate, including where a councillor is required to be in isolation. And 2, include an allocation of $50,000 in the draft financial assistance budget for 2020-21 to waive lease and licence fees for sporting and community groups significantly impacted by COVID-19 for the upcoming financial year.
Okay, we just need to have that last piece put into the motion. Just for the, so this is the original motion. We just need the alternative motion. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'm happy to second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I have a number of questions. Councillor Con, did you wish to speak first or take the questions?
I'd like to provide the rationale for my motion and then absolutely take the questions.
Okay.
So the original notice of motion was submitted Monday last week, and I firstly wanted to thank staff for their really proactive response to that notice of motion. So council has actually received all of this information at the end of last week, and I'm greatly appreciative that that was done so urgently. Thank you. Given the information that we received, that all councillors received last week, it seems some things have already been done really well. I was particularly pleased to hear that we're looking after our staff and that casual staff who've had regular shifts with us for the last 6 months who are now impacted by COVID will also be able to access leave as well as our permanent staff. And I'm very proud that that's the case. Given the breadth of cancellations of many events, sporting, not-for-profit, etc., some of our community groups are anticipating significant financial stress. And one of the suggestions arising from that report from staff that we received at the end of last week was to make a preliminary allocation of $50,000 in our draft budget for next year to anticipate alleviating some of that stress. I understand that a number of those community groups already pay significantly reduced lease fees, but that some of those groups may be facing a zero income situation for a significant number of months. I think this is a really positive, proactive step we can take to alleviate some of that stress for our not-for-profit community groups and sporting groups. I think it's financially prudent to include it in our draft budget at this stage to anticipate that we may face these sort of requests in the coming months, and noting that the budget will still be debated twice prior to final adoption in June, including when we put it out for public exhibition and comment, and that draft allocation, if councillors would agree to it tonight, would still go through that process. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a speaker for, but 2 questions. Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I support this, but would like to ask if the mover and seconder might consider, and I'm happy if they wanted to have this voted on separately as an amendment, but if they would like to include it as part of their motion, 2 other items. So we've got down to 2. So 3 being any other aspects that council may deem appropriate for noting of the councillors in mind of the ongoing changing impacts and requirements to council, so that this is not an exhaustive list, and that 4, that we would ask staff to generate a list of and ensure any possible shovel-ready or near shovel-ready projects are made known to the state and federal government with CC copies to the local members with a view of enabling appropriate funding opportunities in the medium to longer term. And I'm very happy to elaborate on that if the mover and seconder would enable me to do so.
Councillor Con,
I'm happy to accept that amendment without debate.
Councillor Thurley.
Yes, Mr Mayor.
No worries, thank you. So, Councillor Gluckin, can you provide that to the to Terence and we
Yes,
get that?
I can. It's a
Put
bit
on the
messy,
board.
but I can do that. And if I could just make a couple of comments about the second one about the shovel or near shovel ready. I am very conscious of the fact that the governments at the moment are looking at providing funding initially for employment or substitute employment. But the reality is that I believe that there may be packages coming out very soon, and there may not, but if there are packages coming out, I would like us to be organised and ready to go. Primarily, packages or opportunities are made available in such circumstances when projects are shovel-ready or near shovel-ready is number one, and the other is that they're not already within the budget proposals. And so it would be timely for us to deal with that within our current budgeting processes and ensure that we can facilitate projects as and when they become available online. And I think that's part of our bigger budget processing at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gluckin. Councillor Vanderin, question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just point out that the current motion doesn't make any sense. So you've got 1, thanks staff for the prompt provision of information regarding A, and then B says what, if any, rental relief could be provided. So I'm suggesting that we change 1 to include item A, make 2A, B, C and D, and then an item 3. And it's only just a procedural issue because basically you're asking some questions which obviously there's no, you're thanking staff for the prompt provision of information regarding, which doesn't obviously apply to B and C and E.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, happy to include that if it...
It's just a numbering thing,
yeah.
and basically the item 1 is about thanking staff for the prompt attention, provision of information regarding item A.
It's all of them.
And all of them, though.
But why are you asking a question then?
Yeah,
Can I respond to that?
yeah, you can respond. To
I'm not asking the question. The original notice of motion that's now been withdrawn asked staff to provide information, and it was identically all 5 parts A, B, C, D, and E, and that information has been provided. So the report that we were given by staff at the end of last week included A, B, C, D, and E, and I'm now thanking them for the provision of that information. It's not a question anymore. They've provided us with information regarding what, if any, rental relief could be provided, and that's what has prompted the part 2.
Follow-up question. Through you, Mr Mayor,
My pleasure.
to Councillor Con. Would Councillor Con like to share with us, councillors and perhaps the public, on what the original motion looked like that was presented to council? Because I believe that the original motion in our paperwork does not reflect what was provided as a notice of motion initially. And secondly, would you be prepared to advise us where that original idea for that notice of motion came from?
So the original motion was the first motion that was withdrawn. You're saying that that's not the original motion?
Well, I believe there was a different notice of motion lodged with council, and following council staff discussions with Councillor Con, it morphed into what is in our paperwork.
Right.
And the second question is around where that original motion came from.
No problem. Councillor Con's happy to respond.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. More than happy to respond to this. The motion that was included in tonight's paper was requesting a report including the information A, B, C, D and E exactly copied and pasted as it appears on the screen now. So none of those points have changed. That information has been provided. The original motion that I submitted to Mr Zachnich was almost identical to this one. The only changes that were made were minor wording changes. So the 5 points that I was hoping could be addressed were the same 5 points. And the feedback from the staff was that some of those matters had already been dealt with. So, for example, the original motion said Part A, steps that could be taken to protect staff. I had a very productive conversation with Mr Zachnich and with the understanding that significant positive steps had already been taken. And I didn't want to make it seem to the public like those things hadn't already been done. So I accepted Mr Zachnech's minor wording feedback to ask for what steps have already been taken to protect staff. There were a couple of other similar, extraordinarily minor wording changes. Those 5 points were the same 5 points as those originally submitted.
Address one of the issues, Mr Mayor. The other issue is where did the original idea come from? Because I understand that it wasn't actually from you, the idea of this motion, so where did it actually come from?
Councillor Con, you can, Councillor Thurley.
How does Councillor Vandervan, where does he get the assertion that this did not come from you? This is ridiculous. A notice of motion was put up. We've had a change in the wording simply because, as Councillor Con has said, the staff had addressed the issues and she has noted that. If there's some conspiracy that someone else put this wording up, then I'd like to hear it, but I think it's we're way off track right now, thanks.
Just happy to let Councillor Con answer the question now it's been raised, but I understand your point, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Con, you happy to answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. The motion arose because in my daily work as a GP, we've been talking about this and very little else for weeks and weeks, and I was very anxious to assure that Albury City was doing absolutely everything we could within our various roles to lessen the impact on our community. I did speak to a couple of my colleagues in other regional councils socially over the weekend, and we talked about the various roles that council has within the community, and that's reflected in the 5 points there, that council is an employer, council is a landlord, that council could be a provider of financial assistance, that council is an event organiser, etc. So having discussed it with a handful of other people who are councillors in similar councils, I put it together. It was a request for information that we've already been provided, and I honestly don't understand how on earth this is perceived to be controversial.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Con. Councillor Thurley, you're ready to speak for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I support this in its entirety. The staff were already acting on this. We have a very proactive staff, and I believe staff had this under control. It's great that we are placing this on record, that we thank them. I'd simply like to go down to point E, and in fact, there is no way that we, under the present regulation, Local Government General Regulation section, I think 254, says that a councillor must be physically present at a meeting. So unless the state government is prepared to make a change to the Local Government General Regulation 2005, we are required to meet in person. So I think we should lobby the state government to make that option available in these circumstances. However, meeting like this, if this is perceived to be an issue and we wish to send a message to the community, then perhaps we should revert to one council meeting per month, not two. But I do commend the motion, and I believe it is very forward-thinking and proactive.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Just to answer or give you some insight into that, we are discussing options in relation. We've made advocacy to the local government minister, and we're also discussing issues about limiting the meetings to one per month, just to allay that concern. Councillor Vanderman, speaking against.
Only speaking against on the basis, I'd like to move an amendment to item 2, please. And that is to include an allocation of $1 million in the draft budget for issues around the COVID-19 crisis, to allow for us not only to perhaps waive lease and licence fees for any other issues that might come that requires a budget allocation.
Yeah, well, are you foreshadowing that, or you want to discuss it as an
I'm actually moving that
amendment?
amendment now, if
Righto.
that's
You need a
possible.
seconder?
If I can get the support of the mover and seconder, I'll support the motion.
Councillor Con.
I can appreciate that there are likely to be more impacts to council's budget than the $50,000 that were in the original motion, but I wouldn't support the amendment instead of part 2 because your proposed amendment no longer explicitly refers to waiving the lease and licence fees for our community and not-for-profit groups, and I'd like that to be clear.
I did indicate that I would change the motion to include that $1 million budget includes the option to waive the licence, licence and fees for sporting and community groups. So,
Okay, so Councillor Thurley, would you be happy to accept that?
I believe the matter is covered under 3. Any other matter that council may deem appropriate, noting the ongoing change impacts and requirements. That's much more flexible. We put $1 million in there somewhere, so I won't accept it.
Councillor Vandervan, did you have a question?
question of the staff through you, Mr.
Yeah.
Mayor. I believe that there are some issues around having stuff in the budget. You can't spend money that's not in the budget. So do you see my amended motion as providing some options for the staff in case money is required for various issues?
Mr Sacknage.
Thanks for the question through you, Mr Mayor. So item 3 really covers this changing situation. What we can come back to you with, and we will be coming back to you with, is there will be further requests, as we understand, for support or financial assistance. The budget process is still underway, so we can provide that information in a structured way to you to identify what that additional commitment for the draft budget might be, and with some detail behind it, rather than an amount that has no connecting purpose, I suppose, other than a broad range of financial assistance. I think we can be a bit more specific over the coming weeks and bring that to you based on the item 3 in the proposed motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the basis of the answer, I'll withdraw my amendment.
Thank you. Okay, where are we up to? Councillor Thurley. Councillor Glacken, your lights on to speak for?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was rather hesitant when I read the first motion as drafted, and which is why I then wrote the scribbled out notes about including items 3 and 4, because I wanted to ensure that we were not prescriptive, that we did not, or as in overly prescriptive. I wanted to enable staff to have the flexibility with which they could then work around our budget system. Also, the opportunities that may become available from state and federal governments, in addition to the fact that it is an ongoing changing daily, or every minute something changes, one of the parameters change. And so I didn't want us to be too prescriptive, but rather enable our staff to work within that changing environment. And so I wouldn't want to support either an actual allocation of $1 million, and I am somewhat hesitant to give an allocation of $50,000 for financial assistance, but noting that is the suggested way forward from the staff, that's fantastic. However, prior to knowing that, I wasn't that comfortable with it. So I do support this because it is sufficiently broad and not prescriptive, not overly prescriptive in how our staff can assist us and our community to take this forward, because this is something that will continue to morph into something that we cannot, and I certainly cannot begin to imagine what the end is going to look like. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gluckin. Councillor King speaking for.
Through Mr Mayor, yes, I'm speaking on behalf of this, and for the second time I'm tending to agree with Councillor Gluckin that the amount of $50,000, I think the motion is to provide comfort to our resident and ratepayers, that we're certainly thinking about them, and I certainly think that the budget that we've seen, or the potential budget, is going to be nowhere. The one that we've already looking at, in a couple of months is going to be totally different. So again, having $1 million just thrown at it, I don't think it's going to work. It may be $1 million, but I think we have to be tactile and flexible with the way that we approach the upcoming budget, and certainly the unknown.
Thank you. Councillor Con, there's been no speakers for or against. Happy to let you tidy up debate. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I really hope that in its now amended form, and I thank Councillor Gluckin for her additions, that this motion can be supported unanimously by councillors. I truly didn't expect it to be controversial, that as the level of government closest to the community, that we do everything we can to support local community groups. I moved this motion as a concerned resident and a concerned GP, and I'd identified 5 aspects where I thought that council could have a significant impact. Obviously, at this early stage, I have no doubt that things are going to get worse before they get better, and that we may need to anticipate the changing impacts and requirements. Out of the 5 concerns that I had, 3 had already been well addressed by the staff, and I thank them for that. 1 is left in the hands of the state government to amend the regulation regarding our code of meeting practice, and that left 1 item to be addressed, which we can do tonight in part 2. And I hope that will give some great comfort to those community groups that are really quite anxious about their ongoing financial viability. I'm sure we'll be back to discussing this issue in future as we move through the budget process, but I think this is something really positive that we can do tonight to bring some comfort that we can to our community. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Con. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Reports of committees and working parties. 11.1 minutes, the Lauren Jackson Sports Centre Advisory Committee. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I move the minutes and recommendations of the Lauren Jackson Sports Centre Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday, 26 February 2020 be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
On that note, happy to put the minutes. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. We have CM 11.2, which are the minutes of the Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting held on Tuesday the 3rd of March. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the minutes and recommendations of the Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting held on Tuesday, 3rd of March 2020 be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin.
Very happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, just to speak to that.
Just briefly to note that in that meeting, the Community Energy Fund allocated something in the order of $95,000 for community facilities to put solar panels and so on. So another great initiative from this council and the groups.
Thank you. I'm happy to move the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 11.3 of the minutes of the Albury Airport Users Advisory Committee. Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through you to move the recommendation as a motion that the minutes recommendations of the Albury Airport Users Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday, 4 March 2020 be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin, do you wish to speak to that?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Documents for sealing, 12.1. Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll move the recommendation as a motion that council authorises its seal to be affixed to the documents outlined below in the presence of two signatories authorised to affix the seal pursuant to Regulation 400 of the Local Government General Regulation 2005 and the council seal and management of legal documents and advice procedure. Feel free to grab a drink of water because this will take a while. A, deed of agreement to sublease to Dawson Family Enterprises Proprietary Limited, Lot 5, Albury Airport, file 09001724. Albury City lease to National Rugby League Limited of Suite 4, Albury City Council Building, commencing 7 March 2020 for 1 year, file 09018003. Albury City lease to Lake Hume Resort Nominees Proprietary Limited of Crown Land at Lake Hume, 5-year lease commencing 1 February 2020, file 2011547. And D, variation of lease, Albury City lease to Albury Hangar Group Incorporated, formerly M&L Beach, Lot 28 Albury Airport, insertion item 12 to schedule and clause 17, bank guarantee in place of company member guarantors, file 09011738. And no, I don't wish to speak to it.
Councillor Gluckin.
Happy to second that, thank you.
Okay, no one wishing to speak. To Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak to that or?
No.
No, your light's off. Did you wish to close debate, Councillor?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, happy to move the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Officers' reports for consideration. 13.1, Barella Road and Riverina Highway Corridor Strategy. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council endorse the Barella Road and Riverina Highway Corridor Strategy as revised post-exhibition and included in attachment 5.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Very happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
Not particular, just to note that this has been one of the most consulted developments and strategies in our city. We've had numerous meetings and lots of input from the public, so I think we've got something that's well and truly been through the ringer.
Thank you. No more debate or questions. I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 13.2, the Albury Development Control Plan Review of Part 10. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council endorse the revised amendment to Part 10 of the Albury Development Control Plan 2010 to commence 1 July 2020.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin.
Very happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, just to speak to that.
Just to note once again that this has been out on public exhibition, received quite a bit of input, and it forms part of what over the next few years will be a suite of changes to the way planning is carried out in this state and in the city.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion as a division. All those in favour? Councillor Doxey, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Gluckin, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vandervan. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. 13.3, Georgery Road Water Main, Tabletop Reservoir. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to move the recommendation that council accepts the tender from Longford Civil for contract number 19 05218 Georgery Road Water Main Augmentation for the lump sum amount of $752,945.60, including GST. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking for a seconder, thanks. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin, do you wish to open debate on that?
Very briefly, it's an opportunity for council to undertake works to ensure better provision of water, in so much as that area continues to grow, we need to be able to provide more water at better pressure. This is an opportunity to do so. It's fantastic to see that the tenders were so competitive, and I encourage councillors to support this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question from Councillor Vandervan. Councillor Vandervan?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just raised the issue with a few councillors prior to this meeting around perhaps looking to share the work around understanding that there was only $1,000 difference between Longford Civil and Abbott Constructions. Longford Civil was in receipt of a council contract for quite a significant amount of money just prior to Christmas. I'm not sure where that project is, but I believe it's on track and progressing very well. But on the basis of the fact that it's only $1,000 different, just wondering if Councillor Glacken would consider withdrawing her motion and the seconder and having a look at perhaps awarding it to somebody different on the basis that the next tenderer on the list is Abbott Constructions, and there was $1,006 difference in the price. And noting again that both of those prices are within they were $500,000 less than the budget allocation.
Councillor Glacken, do you wish to accept that, or do we have to run it as an amendment?
I think we'll need to run it as an amendment because whilst Councillor Van der Ven may have spoken to some councillors, I haven't had such an opportunity to be able to talk with him today about it. No. And so I think we should run it as an alternative because at the moment I have no reason to consider that we should do other than accept the staff's recommendation. So at the moment I would be supporting the staff recommendation.
Fair response. Councillor King, you have a question?
Yes, Mr Mayor, through the real member of staff. I recall that we accepted a tender, and I think it was the Laguna Roundabout, where the council staff, the prices were very close, and the reports explicitly said that the prices were deemed to be equal, even though they were out. Does the council staff have some sort of policy where they look at a figure where it's $1,000 over, $750,000, where you accept that it's deemed to be equal?
Mr Ferris, did you wish to come up to the dais under the new arrangements?
I think I can answer it from here, Mr Mayor.
Oh, you hooked up?
Yeah. Haven't got it around me here, that's all. Definitely the second and third, the prices here between the two, as outlined by Councillor Van der Ven, are extremely close and would be considered equal based on the value of the contract and the difference between the two. And also both contractors can successfully undertake the project as per the consideration by the panel.
Thank you, Mr Ferris. You happy with that, Councillor King?
Just to follow up, and my memory also goes back that I think we awarded Abbott Constructions a council project. Would you elaborate on which one that was, and can you recall how much that was?
Wise Street, wasn't it? Mr.
Through you, Mr Mayor, was the Centaur Road water main project that ran up Hannah Street and then around Centaur Road. Was it between $300,000 and $400,000 would be an estimate, but I could give you an exact price on that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor King, you comfortable with that?
I'm comfortable.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Doxey, you turned your light off?
I did turn it off, Mr Mayor. I was going to ask a very similar question of staff.
Yeah.
What actually is the variance between the $1,000 is only a figure, but does it make much difference to the final result at the end of the day?
No.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's asked and answered. So, Councillor Van der Ven, it would appear that Councillor Glacken would like you to move another amendment that Council accepts tender from Abbott Constructions. Is that?
I would only be able to do this in the current circumstances. I think if Councillor Glacken withdraws the motion with of the seconder, I would just, if this one doesn't get up, I would foreshadow a different motion. I don't think I can move an amendment because I'd be guided by staff and yourself, but I don't think I can move an amendment to this to say the council accepts the tender from Abbott Constructions. I'm just offering a reason why we could share the work around, not necessarily.
I'm happy for you to move an amendment that the council accepts the tender from Abbott Construction with the appropriate amount for the contract, and we can debate the amendment, and if the amendment is successful, it becomes a motion. So, yes, Mr. Zack.
can't move an amendment.
That's a change of motion. Yeah, all right. Okay, we'll go back to number A. We'll debate this motion. If it's not successful, we'll consider you for shadow motion.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I understand entirely Councillor Van der Ven's thoughts. It appears on the surface not to be that significant an amount, etc. And hence why he's suggesting an alternative tenderer be granted the contract. However, I still see no imperative as to why, other than sharing around, we should be offering this contract to other than the staff recommendation, albeit there being approximately $1,000 difference. The staff undertake a process of analysing the tenders that are submitted. They subject all of them to the same process, and from that they then generate a list of outcomes, and from that comes a recommendation. Part of that is based on price, but not all of that is based on price. Part of that, or a significant part of that, is also based on a number of other factors. With this tender, Longford Civil came out as the tenderer that was recommended by staff. Now, I have absolutely nothing against either Abbott, the subsequent or the next company or any other companies on this list. However, there is no reason, I believe, that we should be accepting a tender or awarding a contract based on anything other than the process that has been gone through by the staff. Longford Civil, I believe, on that basis, should be awarded this contract. And so I cannot support that we give it to another company simply on the basis that there is no evidence provided to me other than the concept of sharing around. So regretfully, to Councillor Van der Ven, I need to follow through with this recommendation, and I support the staff having gone through their standard practice and made their recommendation for, within which we can now award this contract. So I confirm that we should be accepting the tender from Longford Civil. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. We have a speaker against. Councillor Van der Ven.
Look, I don't really want to speak against this thing, but I'm mindful of the fact that already tonight we've made an amendment to a motion that asking council to bring forward shovel-ready projects on the basis that there might be some funding available for them. I'm asking councillors to consider the fact that Longford Civil have just been awarded some very large contracts by Albury City that are still in progress, and on the basis of, and I'm sure that COVID-19 wasn't an issue when these tenders were assessed by our council staff, but I'm just, I suppose, flagging that if we want to have a very diverse range of contractors tendering for our civil projects or our council projects, then I think we need to perhaps have some thought to sharing this this work around, and that was my only rationale for raising the issue. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley speaking for.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I understand Councillor Van der Ven's desire to share the work around, but when I read the report, it says Abbott Constructions Proprietary Limited is a locally based company. Recently, the company has completed the Centaur Road water main project. They currently have 3 projects in hand, including Twin Crescent Drain for Albury City, Hickey Lane, Shepherd's Court. I think the work is being shared around, and I would stick to this recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Con speaking for, no speakers against.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I support this motion not simply because it's the recommendation of the staff. If all we ever did was rubber stamp the staff recommendations, then there wouldn't be much point in coming along to these meetings. But in the information that we've been provided by staff, Longford Civil scored substantially better in the qualitative, so they did better on past performance, capacity, capability and local benefit, and most importantly to me, they indicated that the project would be done 4 weeks earlier, so 14 weeks rather than 18 weeks. So it's on that basis that I support the recommendation. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Okay, that's the remainder of the debate. Councillor Clacken, would you like to close debate?
Thank you. Through you, a couple of things. I do not believe that we are tonight rubber stamping the recommendation of staff. I indicated quite clearly that our staff have gone through a process by which they have made a recommendation. Their recommendation has been tested by them through their process. So we are not rubber stamping this recommendation this evening. The second point I would like to make is that I would like to think that our staff will be considering how we might deal with ensuring that a factor such as sharing things around as a concept might be included within the next round of contracts going out for tender. And that might be one of the aspects that is included in the, I think it was the part 3 of Councillor Con's notice of motion that we crafted or recrafted slightly tonight. And that might be one of those areas where we can have a factor, if staff thought that was appropriate, to be able to look at other opportunities within our community for future tenders for a period of time. However, this tender went out, the tenders were submitted and they were processed according to the current policy of council, and they went through that rigorous process. So this is an appropriate determination tonight that I believe we as councillors ought to be supporting, and I recommend to council that we do so. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. 13.4, the Lamington Sports Ground, Pearsall Street Car Park. Councillor King is leaving the building, the chamber. Thank you, Mr Terry. If you close the door, that'd be great. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to remove the recommendation with the addition of my own part B. So I move that A, Council accepts the tender from Excel Grey Bruni Proprietary Limited for contract number 19-05460 Lavington Sports Ground, Pearsall Street Car Park for the lump sum amount of $279,050.20, including GST. And B, that council staff negotiate with the successful tenderer to include within the scope of works trees and or shade structures within the car park area up to the original budget estimate for the project.
Okay, we'll just wait for that to be included in the motion.
I sent it at 6:01.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Con. Do you open debate? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'll be brief. Part A is the recommendation from the staff. I agree with their assessment of the tenders and I support the successful tenderer. The addition of Part B comes from the successful tender coming in about 60 grand under the budget estimate for this project. So we do have additional funds available in the budget. This car park's 8,000 square metres of tarmac with no shade and no trees. I think that's going to be quite unpleasant for the future users of this car park and will also contribute to the urban heat island effect. I think that if there is scope within the original budget for this project to add those very minor items, then that would be a fantastic improvement. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I have questions from Councillor Vandervan and Councillor Gluckin. Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to relevant staff members. Was it proposed at any stage to have landscaping or shade structures incorporated into this car park?
Mr Lawson, you've got the finger.
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. No, there wasn't significant landscaping included within this project, but certainly looking at some shade structures or tree planting within that area is certainly a good option.
Follow-up?
Yes.
Through you again, Mr Mayor. On the basis of sharing it around, so to speak, is it possible for council staff to award or get expressions of interest for some options around that landscaping and shade structures for the 60k that's anticipated, and then not have to go to tender for that particular EOI?
Mr Lawson?
Yeah, thank you for the question again, through you, Mr Mayor. Certainly if it was deemed that shade structures were the most appropriate solution, that could potentially be awarded as a separate contract. However, with the inclusion of trees, there is certain work that would be required to be undertaken underneath the pavement and would need to be incorporated within the current contract.
Follow-up?
Okay. Thank you. No follow-up, Mr Mayor.
Question, Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. A couple of questions, if I may. The sum of $60,000, I believe, is the figure that was suggested we could possibly utilise for shade structures and car parking. My first question is, for trees. My first question to the most relevant member of staff is this a realistic use of that funding? How many shade structures could we realistically provide? And my second question is there scope for us to use that funding, the gap or the additional funding, for something else? Noting that we are in a period of extreme change. We will be financially limited in a number of areas in the foreseeable future. And so I'd like to ask, is it possible for that funding to be utilised for something else other than directly for this car parking space, noting, as I do appreciate that it is state government funding or supported by the state government, might there be an opportunity at this time to be able to ask that funding be used for something else other than providing shade and trees? Thank you.
Mr Lawson.
Yeah, thank you for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. Certainly, my gut feel, I guess, is that the shade structures would not be an efficient use of the money and probably not provide sufficient shade over that car park area. Therefore, tree planting would probably be the most appropriate solution. With regard to that funding being used for some other purpose, it certainly, should it not be used on this project, then there is an opportunity to utilise that on the site for some other infrastructure or improvement works, should council wish that to be the case.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey, question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is to the appropriate member of staff. Trees. I have nothing against trees. However, how many parking spaces are likely to be lost with the number of trees we plant in the car park? Or are they intended to be around the edges? I'm concerned about root systems in car parks because they do a fair bit of damage and therefore they are a maintenance issue. And do we need a watering system in place to look after them? Thank you.
Mr Lawson.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Through you, Mr Mayor. Certainly I'd have to take the first question on notice with regard to how many trees we would be able to plant in the pavement and how many parks might be lost. Sorry, the second question was around the watering and
the root system.
And the root system. Root system can be managed through the use of some engineering soils that can find roots within that sort of plot area. And no, we wouldn't necessarily have to include watering within that area. It could be just watered on an as required basis.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, you have another question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Is it anticipated, as a result of item B being added to this, that we're going to be informed as to what the outcome is going to be with those negotiations with the successful tenderer?
Yep, that would be the case.
Before any work progresses?
Part of
Because
the
if they come
negotiation.
up with for a plan for 10 trees for 60 grand, I'd want to have a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak for the motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a matter that the Sustainability Advisory Committee thinks about all of the time, the heat island effect. We've done a number of studies in this city that shows in streets that have got trees, the temperatures are significantly lower. In areas without trees and streets without trees, the temperatures are higher. This is not just confined to Albury City. It's being recognised by governments at all levels that we are contributing to city warming by simply building these structures which are, doesn't matter whether they're concrete or asphalt, but if it's asphalt it's worse because it's black. This to me is a minor addition that will not only help with the heat island effect but will make the place look better. A bare black car park over there close to a housing subdivision and so on is just not the way to go. We can do better than this and I fully support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Just to clarify, the report says includes a gravel car park. Is it gravel or tarmac? What is it? What is it, Mr Lawson?
It's through you, Mr Mayor. It's a gravel car park.
Thank you.
So gravel falls somewhere between asphalt and concrete.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Speaker against, Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I support us awarding the tender, but I cannot support Part B about the shade sails and or trees. On the basis that how frequently is that car park going to be used, and therefore what value will that 60,000 achieve with shade sails and or trees in an area that already has trees? Not in the car park necessarily, but in that surrounding area there are a significant number of trees. And noting that the staff have indicated to us that it would be possible to use that excess funding for an alternative option within this site, I foreshadow that should this motion be lost, that I would move an alternative motion, and that alternative motion would be A, that we accept the tender, and that B, staff provide us with subsequently provide us with possible options for use within that precinct of the additional funding. And regretfully, I will have to appear to be voting against this motion to be awarding this tender. So should this be lost, I will put the alternative motion forward, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Councillor Conn, did you wish to close debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, we're frequently asked to add shade to our projects after they've been completed. If there's an opportunity to negotiate to improve the project and spend the same amount as what we originally budgeted, then I think we should take that opportunity. As Councillor Solis explained, the urban heat island effect is improved with shade or with trees, regardless of how frequently this car park is used. And I think it could be a quite simple means of getting an improved result.
Thank you. On that note, I'll put the motion. Those for the motion? Those against the motion? The motion is tied. I vote for the motion. Thank you, councillors. So 13.5, the draft Albury City Privacy Management Plan. Thank you. And we need Councillor King back. That's who we need. Can you walk any slower? Or? Thank you, Councillor King. Returning to the chamber. Can I have a mover for the motion on the screen, please, councillors? Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the council consider and adopt the draft Albury City Privacy Management Plan 2020 as presented.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that at all?
A well-written, well-presented report, and it's an easy matter for me to agree to this motion.
Thank you. No further speakers against or questions. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 14, officers' reports for noting. 14.1, the monthly development statistics, February 2020. Councillor Con.
Thank you. I move that council receive and note the information in the monthly development statistics report for February 2020.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Con, did you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you.
Thank you. I just have one question. There are no speakers for or against. I just have a question in relation to the numbers quoted in the report, and probably be relevant to Mr Christie. In relation to the clear days that the DAs, the CCs and everything are being approved, there's a prevailing view that, and it's been confirmed in different times in this chamber, that we have a staffing issue with our planning department. But the turnaround of these reports and these approvals, is there an overall figure there, or is it, because you're talking about 39 clear days for DAs and et cetera, is there an average for, if we're going to build a house, is there an average that we're looking at in terms of, is it 38 days, 39 days, or include all three in relation to that?
This is working, is it? Yep.
That sounds all right.
Yep. Thank you for the question, Mr Mayor. I guess from that I've looked through the stats for this year, so since the 1st of January, and we've approved 38 houses for development applications, and they've taken an average of 35 business days. Now, the longest one's been 78 with number of twos and fros with information. The shortest one's been 6 days. It didn't require notification to neighbours. Prevailing is around that 35 business days for an average, which on working weeks is about 7 weeks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there being no further question or debate, Councillor Con, I think, moved that. We had a seconder, did we? Councillor Thurley. Councillor Con, did you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to move the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 14.2, investment balances for February 2020. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to move the recommendation as a motion that council receive and note the investment balances report for the month of February 2020.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you.
Thank you. No further questions or debate. I have put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have no delegates' reports for noting. I have one notice of urgent business. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's simply a question for the staff to consider if it might be an opportunity now, in a timely opportunity for us to ask the New South Wales Government if they could consider at this early stage possible alternative options for the local government elections scheduled for September, should they actually proceed, that being suggestions of perhaps postal and or electronic voting options. So if we could ask that question now, that might enable the New South Wales Government to deal with that in an informed way as opposed to a rush way. Thank you.
Mr. Zachnich.
We can do, thank you for the question, we can do through Mr Mayor, and that question's already been asked in terms of seeking a response from the New South Wales Government around the timing of those elections to start with, whether they will be postponed or the alternatives as you've suggested, so we can ask that formally now.
Thank you, Councillor Gluckin. Okay, well that completes our business for this evening. I might further add that thanks to the staff for bringing the meeting together, but I also would further add that the councillors have worked collegially together to try and find solutions to the current crisis, and we'll all continue to do that. So thank you again, and thanks for coming tonight.